Welcome, everyone. Today we're going to explore the monumental achievements and, quite frankly, the stark realities of the Victorian era. We're looking at the 19th century, a time that fundamentally built the modern world we live in, yet was simultaneously dealing with conditions so primitive they seem almost unimaginable to us today. It truly was the age of paradox. So let's kick off this explainer with a bit of a mind-bender. What did the first computer program, the telephone, and the discovery of dinosaurs all have in common? I know, it sounds like the setup to a strange joke, but the answer is that they all originated in the 19th century. This single 100-year span brought us the mechanical blueprints of the digital age, instant global communication, and the very concept of prehistoric life. Heck, the word dinosaur itself was coined by Richard Owen in 1841. It was an era of massive, dizzying contradictions, where unprecedented intellectual leaps happened right alongside intense social struggles. Here is our roadmap for today. First, we'll cover the birth of the scientist. Second, connecting the Victorian world. Third, unlocking the natural universe. Fourth, the harsh social reality. And finally, medicine, sanitation, and society. All right, diving right into Section 1, the birth of the scientist, moving from philosophers to professionals. It's honestly incredible to think that the word scientist didn't even exist before the Victorian era. Seriously. Prior to 1833, if you studied biology, chemistry, or physics, you were just known as a natural philosopher. But as society began to really lean into empiricism and specialized expertise, a man named William Whewell realized they needed a new word to describe this totally new breed of professional. So he just invented the term scientist. It was a huge watershed moment, signaling that studying the mechanics of the universe was finally a legitimate, dedicated career. And you know what? This new breed of professionals quickly became celebrities. Science actually turned into a massive public spectacle for the upper classes. At places like the Royal Institution in London, expert chemists like Sir Humphrey Davy hosted wildly popular public lectures. Just imagine high society men and women gathering in a grand lecture hall to watch explosive chemical demonstrations instead of going to the theater. It was basically the 19th century equivalent of a blockbuster movie premiere. It proved that understanding the universe wasn't just practical, it was high entertainment. Moving right along to Section 2, connecting the Victorian world, trains, telegraphs, and engines. The sheer speed of innovation during this time was absolutely staggering. We start in 1825 with the Stockton and Darlington Railway, literally the very first public railway in the world. Suddenly, goods and people are moving at speeds nobody thought possible. Then, just 12 years later, boom, we get the telegraph, meaning messages are now traveling at the speed of electricity. Fast forward to 1876, Alexander Graham Bell patents the telephone, letting human voices cross miles of wire. And by 1895, Wilhelm Röntgen is literally looking inside the human body with X-rays. In a single human lifetime, the world went from horse-drawn carriages to global telecommunications and medical imaging. But get this, the most shocking technological leap wasn't made of iron or steam, it was made of pure logic. Back in the 1840s, while trains were just starting to chug across the countryside, Ada Lovelace was already writing the world's first computer program. She was collaborating with Charles Babbage on his analytical engine, which was a theoretical, steam-powered mechanical computer. Lovelace realized that this machine could do so much more than just crunch numbers. It could actually manipulate symbols and logic. Her notes predicted the modern digital age, recognizing that a machine could execute any algorithm we knew how to order it to perform. Absolutely brilliant. That brings us to Section 3, unlocking the natural universe. Atoms, energy, and evolution. Think about chemistry, for instance. Early in the century, John Dalton basically handed us the fundamental building blocks of chemical structures with his atomic theory. He proposed that all elements are made of these indivisible, indestructible particles called atoms that combine in specific ratios. And while Dalton was mapping out matter, physicists like Lord Kelvin were busy mapping out energy. Kelvin formalized the laws of thermodynamics and even deduced the concept of absolute zero. They were quite literally uncovering the hidden blueprints of the physical universe. And then, biology gets its own massive shakeup. In 1859, Charles Darwin published On the Origin of Species, and this single book radically shifted humanity's entire understanding of life on Earth. By introducing evolution by natural selection, Darwin provided a working mechanism for how life adapts and changes over deep time. And this was happening right alongside other huge theoretical leaps, like James Clerk Maxwell mathematically proving that light is actually an electromagnetic wave. It was just an absolute golden age of human curiosity. But let's shift gears for Section 4, the harsh social reality, the dark underbelly of all this progress. The social contrast here is just staggering. For the Victorian upper and emerging middle classes, life was structured and relatively comfortable. They lived by this ideology of separate spheres where men went off to white-collar jobs and women managed the domestic household, and they spent their evenings at those fancy science lectures. But the working and underclasses, they were the literal engine of the Industrial Revolution. We're talking about children forced into 12 to 18-hour shifts in brutal, rat-infested coal mines. Desperate working mothers had to hand their infants over to baby farmers, which were paid foster carers, often resulting in horrific neglect. And if you fell into total poverty, you ended up in a workhouse, which was essentially just a prison for the poor. 73,240. Let that sink in. That is exactly how many people were arrested in London in the year 1856 alone. And remember, the population was much, much smaller back then. This statistic really highlights the sheer desperation, poverty, and social disorder of the era. The rapid urbanization of the Industrial Revolution crammed people into filthy, overcrowded slums, which inevitably led to massive spikes in violence, theft, and public drunkenness. This extreme divide between the rich and the poor created immense paranoia. In the 1850s and 60s, there was this massive media panic over garroting, a type of mugging where the victim was choked from behind. It sounds like something out of a movie today, but the fear was so intense that inventors actually designed and successfully marketed literal spiked collars. Wealthy Londoners would wear them under their coats to protect their necks from muggers. It's a bizarre historical fact, but it perfectly captures the intense physical fear the upper classes had of the impoverished underclass living right next to them. Which leads us to our final part, Section 5, Medicine, Sanitation, and Society, where science finally steps in. We all know Florence Nightingale, the famous nurse, right? But did you know she was also a pioneering statistician? During the Crimean War, she essentially invented the polar pie chart to forcefully prove a point to the British government. She used data to show them that it wasn't enemy bullets killing most of their soldiers, it was infectious diseases caused by horrible sanitation in the field hospitals. Her data-driven approach completely revolutionized public health demands. And we see a brilliantly similar use of data back in London with Dr. John Snow. In 1854, cholera was absolutely devastating the Soho district. At the time, people thought the disease spread through bad air, or miasma. But Snow mapped out the cases block by block and traced the epicenter of the outbreak directly to a single contaminated water well on Broad Street. By simply removing the handle of the water pump, he stopped the deadly epidemic in its tracks. This mini-narrative shows how pure observation and basic data mapping led to the realization that the disease was waterborne, which paved the way for modern sewage systems. Eventually, this focus on sanitation hit the operating room. Thanks to Louis Pasteur proving the germ theory of disease, a British surgeon named Joseph Lister had a massive revelation in 1867. He introduced carbolic acid to sterilize surgical instruments and actually instructed hospital staff to wash their hands. It is wild to think that before this, surgeons routinely operated in blood-soaked aprons with completely unwashed hands. Antiseptics, combined with new anesthetics like chloroform, completely revolutionized medicine, drastically reducing infections and making modern surgery possible. Now, progress usually has a shadow, and this one is pretty gruesome. As global trade brought cheap sugar to the British masses, tooth decay absolutely skyrocketed. Since anesthetics now made pulling rotting teeth relatively painless, there was a huge demand for dentures. The solution? Waterloo teeth. People bought upper-class dentures made from hand-carved hippo or walrus ivory, but they were implanted with real human teeth. Where did they come from? Grave robbers, executed criminals, and scavengers pulling them from the mouths of dead soldiers on battlefields. Yeah, progress definitely had a dark side, but it highlights just how drastically daily life, diet, and medicine were transforming all at the exact same time. So, we've seen how the 19th century laid the groundwork for everything from quantum physics to the computer, yet did so on the backs of child laborers and rampant inequality. It forces us to ask, knowing that the foundations of our modern world were built on both breathtaking genius and profound human suffering, how should we judge the true cost of today's rapid technological leaps? I'll leave you with that provocative thought. Are we creating our own paradoxes today? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep questioning the history behind our progress.